And once again, Professor Granville Sewell has graced us with the 5th of 5 lectures on intelligent design. We thank him for being with us.
Yes.
And let us begin with prayer, shall we? The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Again, Lord God, we thank you for gathering us here in this place around this very important topic of how did things come to be? We've heard your word, we see the world around us, and we wonder and we reach for answers. And answers are available, but the full answer is not. So, Lord God, help us to find a few more answers this evening, or at least show us the right questions to be asking, and lead us in our lives to take great care of that which you have given us, life, and life abundant. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. With that, Professor Sewell.
Okay, this last day I'm going to start by just showing the whole video, but pay particular attention to the last 2 parts, which is what we're going to discuss today, the 5th and 6th points. Over the 5th one is about the origin of conscious humans, of human consciousness, and the 6th one is about the beginning of time, but I thought I might as well show the whole thing here. It's only about 11 minutes long, and then we'll start talking about 5 and 6.
It is well known and well accepted in scientific circles that the conditions on our planet are extremely fine-tuned for life. The Earth is just the right size, it is just the right distance from the Sun, our Sun is the right type of star, our atmosphere has many rare and lucky features. The list goes on and on. Of course, materialists have a plausible explanation for this. There are many planets in the universe, but only a very few are suitable for life, and we are here because our Earth is one of those rare planets. At least it would be a plausible explanation if the materialist assumptions were plausible, that once you have a planet where conditions are just right, there is a reasonable chance that life would spontaneously arise and intelligent beings would spontaneously evolve over time. But we will see that these assumptions are not plausible. It is also widely accepted that not only is our Earth an ideal planet for life to thrive, but our whole universe is fine-tuned for life. The smallest changes in most of the basic constants of physics, the gravitational constant, Planck's constant, the charge and mass of the electron, and so forth, or of the initial conditions at the Big Bang, would have led to a universe where no conceivable form of life could have arisen. Stephen Hawking, in A Brief History of Time, writes, "The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life." How do materialists explain this? There must be many universes with many different laws and constants and initial conditions, and we are here because our universe is one of those rare universes where the conditions are just right for us to be here. A.J. Leggett lists some of the fine-tuned properties of our universe in The Problems of Physics and concludes, "The list could be multiplied endlessly, and it is easy to draw the conclusion that for any kind of conscious beings to exist at all, the basic constants of nature have to be exactly what they are, or at least extremely close to it." The anthropic principle then turns this statement around and says, in effect, that the reason the fundamental constants have the values that they do is because otherwise we would not be here to wonder about them. Paul Davies, in Other Worlds, writes, "If we believe there are countless other universes, either in space or time, or in superspace, there is no longer anything astounding about the enormous degree of cosmic organization that we observe. We have selected it by our very existence. The many universes theory does provide an explanation for why many things around us are the way they are." Just as we can explain why we are living on a planet near a stable star by pointing out that only in such locations can life form, so we can perhaps explain many of the more general features of the universe by this anthropic selection process. This time, there's no evidence. There can never be any evidence that there are other universes out there with the same laws of physics but random values for the basic constants, or perhaps random laws of physics also. So the explanation that our universe is just right because otherwise we would not be here to wonder about it is completely unscientific. It is interesting that those who for many years have ridiculed religious believers for imagining that there is another universe, another dimension out there with better conditions awaiting us, have now been reduced by the evidence for fine-tuning to inventing not one, but countless other universes with different conditions. By the way, a number of scientists, for example, biochemist Michael Denton in his 2016 book Firemaker, and physicist Robin Collins in a chapter of a 2018 Oxford University Press book, The Argument from Physical Constants, the Fine-Tuning for Discoverability, are now showing us that the conditions on Earth and the laws of physics are not only fine-tuned for the survival of intelligent beings, they are also fine-tuned for the development of technology and for scientific discovery. Astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez, in his book The Privileged Planet, has shown that the Earth is not only well designed for human survival, it is also ideally situated for viewing the rest of the universe. These fine-tunings are interesting because they cannot be explained by the conditions were just right because otherwise we would not be here to wonder about it arguments. We would still be here to wonder if the conditions on Earth and the properties of the chemical elements and compounds were not so finely tuned to make possible the development of technology and scientific discovery. The only explanation for these fine-tunings is they are gifts from our designer to challenge and entertain us. It is often claimed that science is close to understanding how the first simple life form arose through entirely natural processes. To see how baseless this claim is, you only have to realize that with all our advanced technology, we are still not close to designing any type of self-replicating machine. That is still pure science fiction. So how could we imagine that such a machine could have arisen by pure chance, even given a universe with fine-tuned laws and a planet with fine-tuned conditions? When we add technology to such a machine to move toward the goal of reproduction, we only move the goalpost, as now we have a more complicated machine to reproduce. Maybe someday human engineers will design a self-replicating machine like we see everywhere in the living world, but it will not happen in my lifetime, and it will not be simple, and it will certainly not show that such a machine could have arisen without design. Materialists believe they already understand how the first living things evolved into intelligent beings, but they really do not have a clue. To appreciate this, you only have to realize that what they are forced to believe is that the four fundamental unintelligent forces of physics alone could have rearranged the basic particles of physics on Earth into tall buildings, computers and cell phones, and airplanes and the internet. As my new video, Why Evolution is Different, brings out, the laws of physics are very cleverly designed and probably can explain everything that has happened on other planets, but they are obviously not clever enough to explain by themselves the development of computers and cars and Apple iPhones. This video also points out how similar the fossil record is to the development of human technology, with obvious similarities between each new invention and previous designs, but with large gaps where major new features appear for the same reasons. Gradual development of the new organs that gave rise to new orders, classes, and phyla would require the development of new but not yet useful features. So Darwinism could not explain the development of these new features even if they did occur gradually, and they don't. Here is a picture of 3 children in the 1950s. One of them is me, the other 2 are not. I saw the world from inside one of these children. I saw every picture that entered through his eyes. I heard every sound that entered through his ears, and when he fell on the sidewalk, I felt his pain. How did I end up inside one of these children? This is a question that rarely seems to trouble evolutionists. They talk about human evolution as if they were outside observers and never seem to wonder how they got inside one of the animals they are studying. They consider that human brains are just complicated computers, and so to explain how we got here, they just have to explain how these mechanical brains evolved. But even if they could explain how animals with mechanical brains evolved out of the primeval slime, that would leave the most important question, the one evolutionists never seem to even wonder about, still unsolved. How did I get inside one of these animals? For thousands of years, nearly everyone in every corner of the world looked at plants and animals and said, "These things are obviously designed. I wonder who designed them." Only the modern scientist, overconfident from so much success in unraveling other mysteries, says, "These things sure look like they were designed, and the deeper we dig, the more designed they look, but who designed the designer? Nothing can possibly be beyond the reach of our science, so if we can't explain where the designer came from, he can't exist." For many years, materialists avoided the parallel question of who designed matter and energy by saying they have always existed. But in the last century, it was discovered that matter and energy and space and time did begin suddenly with a big bang about 14 billion years ago. What came before the Big Bang? Even if before the beginning of time, as we know it, is not meaningful in a temporal sense, it is still meaningful in a causal sense. It's because out of nothing comes nothing. There has to be some first cause. Whether this first cause is intelligent or unintelligent, there is by definition no hope of ever explaining it in terms of earlier causes. Materialists can say that their currently preferred universe-generating mechanism needs no explanation because it is eternal, but we can equally say our designer needs no explanation because he is eternal. So why not assume a first cause that can explain what was caused? A well-designed universe with physical laws that are extremely fine-tuned for the magnificently designed plants and animals, and intelligent, conscious humans that arose on our magnificent earth.
Okay, the fifth point, as you saw, is about the origin of human consciousness. And to me, that's one of the strongest arguments for design of all, and yet it doesn't seem to be, other people don't seem to share my, it doesn't seem to be as powerful for them. I'm not sure I understand why, but basically, if you believe that humans are entirely the result of a mechanical process like natural selection of random mutations, then that means we're just machines. I mean, there's no getting around it, whether it's random mutation or natural selection or some other Lamarckism or whatever. If a purely mechanical process, if that's all we are, then we're just machines. And generally, Darwinists, if they're pressed, they will admit that. In fact, they basically accept that we're just machines. And to me, that's an absurd conclusion. It's going to lead to some more absurd conclusions, but basically we're just advanced computers. And in fact, there's something called a Turing Test that was proposed by Alan Turing a good while ago, and basically, simplified version says that if you communicate with somebody with a computer in the next room, you can't see who you're communicating with. You text back and forth or something. And if you can't tell whether it's a human or not, then basically you have to say that that computer can think in the same sense that humans think. And some people will say, well, you have to consider it to be conscious. Well, I don't think any computer really can pass a Turing test with me. I think I could figure out, it might take me a while talking with GPT, but I think I could eventually figure out that I was talking to artificial intelligence instead of a human, but so suppose we can't. I mean, it's possible that someday computers will be able to pass a Turing test, and you really, if you're in the next room communicating with it, you really can't tell whether you're talking to a computer or a human. And then most Darwinists, at least, would say, you know, it's the same. We're just advanced computers. And well, if I were an alien visitor to the Earth and I came here and I saw humans and some really advanced robots with ChatGPT installed, maybe I couldn't tell the difference, but I'm not. I'm inside one of the humans, not the computers, the humans. And I know that I'm not just a machine. And, you know, I'm not sure about y'all. You might all be very cleverly programmed machines, but I know I'm not anyway. And that's the end of it to me. But let's do a little simple Turing test here. To suppose you send a text message to 2 telephone numbers, and one of them is read by a computer and one is read by a human friend, and you write to both of them, "My mother died last week," and they both text back, "I'm saddened by the death of your mother." Well, one of them's a computer and one's a friend, and you know, that certainly computers can easily look for the keywords there and come up with a reasonable reply like that. But would you say they're the same? I mean, you know, do you really think the computer was saddened by the death of your mother? And what about your friend? And basically, that's about all I have to say about that, because I don't know what else to say if you don't realize you're not a machine. Well, most of you do, but Darwinists basically don't. They say, well, yeah, you're right. Darwinism has to be right, so we must be machines. And that leads to some other weird conclusions. If we're just complicated computers, well, everybody knows that computers just do exactly what they're programmed to do, nothing more or less. If you knew exactly what the input was and how it was programmed, and you knew everything, you know, it may be impossible in practice, but in theory, you could tell exactly what the computer's going to do. And that's not just my opinion. Everybody recognizes that. But Darwinists or any materialist would say, you know, it's the same, they'd have to say, I don't know if they really believe it or not, but they're forced to say that, well, you know, same thing about humans. If we knew everything about the input to humans, heredity, environment, and so forth, we could predict exactly what they're going to do. So they basically forced to believe that humans also have no free will. And, you know, and a lot of them do say that. Well, you know, I certainly agree that behavior is influenced by heredity and environment. One example I like to give is that people with an X and Y chromosome are known to be more violent than people with 2 X chromosomes, right? And humans people that were abused as children are more likely to be abusers. So, you know, there's no doubt that heredity and environment influence our behavior. But I still claim, you know, my behavior isn't entirely determined by my heredity environment. And one well-known atheist, University of Chicago scientist Jerry Cohen, is convinced that humans really have no free will, and he's written some things that basically say our justice system should take this into account. Heaven forbid, but you know, if he had said that people's behavior is more influenced, we have less control over our behavior than we realize, then I might even agree with him. But he's saying that we have no control whatever over our own behavior. And so I wrote a little humorous, I thought, reply. Well, I didn't actually send it to him, but I posted this, and I said, well, you'll see why I didn't. It says, the idea that humans have absolutely no free will leads to some bizarre conclusions. University of Chicago scientist Jerry Cohen is trying to convince everyone that humans have no free will and that our justice system should take this into account. So I decided to write him an email saying, If no one has any free will, then everything, including whether or not society accepts your ideas on justice, was determined long ago by the initial conditions at the Big Bang, so why work so hard trying to convince people? Just sit back and see what they do. But then I thought maybe there's no point in trying to convince him that this is pointless, because whether or not he will keep trying was also determined a long time ago. On further reflection, I decided I'd just sit back and see if I wrote him or not. So to me, it's absurd to say that I have no free will. I mean, maybe you don't, I think you do, but I know I have some free will, even though I realize my behavior is influenced by lots of things. I'm a lot more likely to punch somebody in the face if they call me a idiot than if they call me a genius, but I still think I have some control over the matter. Well, if your assumptions keep leading you to unreasonable, one more thing. If there's really no free will, and if we're really just machines, then there's no free will. And if there's no free will, there's no right and wrong. And I believe there is a right and wrong. We don't all agree over what is right and what's wrong, but there's some core that most everybody agrees on. And even atheists, they may admit that they're forced to believe there's no right and wrong, but they really believe there is. Have you ever heard an atheist make any moral statements? Well, of course they do. They realize there is a right and wrong. So to me, if your assumptions keep leading you to unreasonable conclusions, and I believe these are unreasonable conclusions, it might be time to question your assumptions. And the Bible says God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. And of course, this is figurative, and I'm not sure exactly how to interpret it, but to me, that makes a whole lot more sense than the materialist assumption that we're just machines. Okay, well, that's it for number 5. Now we're going on to number 6, which is the beginning of time. And I have a little, there's a video I want to show you here first. It's another one of the Science Uprising videos about the Big Bang, which, as I've said a couple of times, is a good thing. It's not an atheist attempt to explain how the universe came into existence. It's just recognizing that the universe did come into existence suddenly a finite time ago. So here's
how does something come out of nothing? How do we have a universe that comes out of nothing?
Astronomers believe there are 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. Scientists are still trying to figure out how all of this arose, seemingly out of nothing.
Well, it turns out if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, then in fact space itself becomes dynamical, and universes, spaces themselves and time can pop into existence where there was none before.
So you can create whole universes where there was no universe before. And indeed, in that way, you might imagine creating a universe from literally nothing. Whole universes from literally nothing, out of existence.
Out of nothing.
Whole universes, nothing.
Wait, our universe popped into existence from literally nothing? There is no cause for all of this? So, straight up nothing. No matter, no creator, then poof, the universe? That's actually the story some atheist scientists are peddling right now. Sounds pretty desperate to me. Stephen Meyer, a philosopher of science and best-selling author, explains how atheists got backed into this corner.
It was generally assumed by most physicists prior to the 1920s and 30s that the universe was eternal and therefore self-existent, that it had always been here and really didn't require an explanation. There was one physicist said an infinitely old universe would relieve us of the necessity of explaining the origin of the universe at any finite time in the past.
But then, the idea of an eternal universe was challenged by a pair of surprising discoveries. First, it became clear that almost all the galaxies in the universe are moving away from us. Then it got weirder. 2 guys figured out that generally the farther a galaxy is from us, the faster it's moving away. One was a Belgian physicist and Catholic priest, Georges Lemaitre. The second was American astronomer Edwin Hubble. Drawing on Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity, they then realized that space itself is expanding. Physicist Brian Miller explains why.
Let me use an analogy. If you have a balloon and you imagine putting dots on that balloon to represent galaxies, and then that balloon inflates, what happens is all the dots move away from each other. And dots that are further apart will move away from each other even faster. And that's exactly the sort of evidence we see in our universe.
This discovery suggests that if you reverse time, like a movie running backward, then all the galaxies would draw back together to a single point, which led to a conclusion that some scientists didn't really want to face.
The universe has been expanding from a finite beginning point, where not only matter and energy, but time and space itself began.
Today, scientists call this first moment of the universe the Big Bang.
All started with the Big Bang.
The Big Bang theory means the universe is not eternal after all. It has a beginning. Even more radical, the Big Bang implies that the cause of the universe must be something non-material.
The Big Bang shows that all of time, matter, space, and energy started at a single moment in the past. Therefore, whatever started it has to be outside of time and space.
You can't posit a materialistic explanation because there's no matter there before the beginning to do the causing.
Many scientists initially resisted the Big Bang, including Einstein, whose theory partly inspired the idea.
He really didn't want at that point in his career to think about the beginning of the universe because he didn't want to think about what would be necessary to explain the origin of the universe if we're talking about all of matter, all of energy, all of space and time.
Einstein eventually accepted the Big Bang theory, but others went on searching for an option that would fit the data without requiring an actual beginning. One that grabbed a lot of attention was the oscillating universe model.
The universe would be expanding outward, but then as the expansion slowed, the matter in the universe by gravitational force would cause the universe to recollapse. But once it recollapsed, then by some unknown mechanism, it would expand again. So you'd get a series of big crunches followed by big bounces. That theory ran into two big problems. The first was it was discovered that there was not enough matter in the universe to cause the universe to recollapse. And secondly, it was determined by thermodynamic analysis. The energy available to do work would diminish with each successive cycle. It would be kind of like a ball bouncing to the ground and finally it would damp out where there's no more bounces.
Who's gonna get it? They drop it. Oh, man.
So the oscillating universe model was a big fail. And actually, all the attempts to evade a true cosmic beginning ran into serious problems. The evidence for the Big Bang kept piling on until most scientists accepted it. Some scientists, however, found themselves facing serious doubts, not about science, but about atheism. World-renowned astronomer Robert Jastrow didn't believe in God, but he found it hard to get around what the Big Bang seemed to be telling him.
So there is a beginning, there is a point in time from which it all started. And that's a remarkable thing because it has a very strong theological flavor to it. And that intrigued me because I am an agnostic, and if there was a beginning, a moment of creation in the universe, then there was a creator.
Of course, a lot of scientists still resist going where the science seems to be leading. Take physicist Stephen Hawking. Before his death, he proposed a new argument against the need for a cosmic creator.
Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing.
Now, when I first read that, I was staggered because it's self-contradictory to start with. Because there is a law of gravity, because there is something, the universe can create itself from nothing. That's a flat contradiction. And then to say the universe can create itself, that's logical nonsense. If I say that X creates Y, roughly speaking, I'm saying if you've got X, you may in the end get Y. But if I say X creates X, then that simply proves to me that nonsense remains nonsense even if high-powered scientists say it.
Well, what about physicist Lawrence Krauss and his something from nothing idea?
Imagine creating a universe from literally nothing.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Because how they get a universe from nothing is by redefining nothing.
Krauss's nothing is actually something, a set of laws and mathematical equations. That's the first problem. Meyer explains the second problem.
Krauss's nothing involves the equations of quantum physics. And equations are mathematical entities. And mathematical entities are abstract concepts, always exist in minds. So his nothing seems to imply the need for a pre-existing mind.
A pre-existing mind. Now what does that sound like?
The Big Bang provides very, very strong evidence pointing to God. Because it shows that everything started, all matter, time, space, and energy, at some point in the past, that means that something had to start it. And that something had to be immaterial, timeless, infinitely powerful, and even personal, because only a personal being can choose to act with purpose.
But some people will embrace almost any absurdity to avoid the possibility of God.
You say there are 3 different types of nothing.
That's right.
What are the 3? I didn't know there was such a variety. A sampler platter. You haven't been rubbing any of that baby shampoo on your head, have you? With the THC in it?
Well,
no?
I'm no
You're
comment.
clean?
No comment.
You're clean? Leave me a hair sample.
3 kinds of nothing or 3 kinds of nonsense. If people can convince you that our entire existence comes from nothing, then it's just a short step to believe as a product of nothing, you are nothing. That all the things you see, touch, taste, smell, think, and feel mean nothing because they came from nothing, were caused by nothing, and serve nothing. But if you and the universe were created by someone, a grand creative genius, the maker of matter, energy, space, and time, then you were made for a reason. Your existence means something. You are here for a purpose. For those willing to open their eyes, that's the amazing reality science is revealing. We are not materialists. We see the human soul. We experience love. We live with purpose. We fight for justice. We are the quiet majority, and we will be quiet no longer.
Okay. Now, the Big Bang Theory is based on Einstein's general theory of relativity, which I won't pretend to understand. Hardly anybody does, really. But before you dismiss the Big Bang as science fiction, I mean, the main point of the Big Bang is that the universe had a beginning, 14 billion years ago or whatever. Before that, there wasn't any before that. No, not even empty space. And that, as hard as that is to comprehend, I think you can believe it a little more if you think about the alternative. What's the alternative to the universe having a beginning? Well, that's infinitely old, which people used to think. But, if you think about that, that doesn't make much sense. For example, and this is just one example, but a little thought experiment to make you realize how weird it would be, even weirder, if the universe were infinitely old. In the stars, hydrogen is being fused into helium and higher and heavier elements, and eventually all the hydrogen is going to be used up, or at least they'll burn out. So eventually all the stars would burn out, and if the universe were infinitely old, they should have all burned out by now, right? Well, it gets weirder than that. If you think, well, how long ago would they have burned out? Well, let's say 1 trillion years ago. Well, let's go back 1 trillion years. Shouldn't they have burned out long before that? So, I mean, it's, I still think infinity is something that exists only in mathematics and nowhere else. But anyway, to me, hard as it is to think of a universe having a beginning, which is what science now believes pretty much uniformly, that's one of the 3 things that's driving the God hypothesis back into science, according to Steve Meyer. The key thing there is that the universe had a beginning, and if you don't believe that, well, it doesn't get any better. If you believe the universe is infinitely old, then that's even more problematic as far as I'm concerned. So actually, one of the chapters in my book, it was called In the Beginning and Other Essays on Intelligent Design. The chapter called In the Beginning is about the Big Bang. And I actually have a little mathematical model in there for the expanding universe. It's not based on the general theory of relativity. It's based on just classical gravitational theory, and I didn't come up with it, but I show that basically, just using that classical gravitational theory, you could extrapolate back, and at some point in the past, all the galaxies must have been extremely close together. In fact, according to Einstein's general theory of relativity, apparently, which I don't claim to understand, it came out of nothing. So, but something had to exist before. What happened before the Big Bang? Well, that's the question. But it couldn't have been, as Brian Miller says, it couldn't have been a material. It couldn't have been caused by anything in this universe. And you remember Leconte's axiom that everything must have a natural cause, which, as we said, is very reasonable for most purposes. It's a very productive axiom, but it fails at the beginning of time because Leconte's axiom, he himself in his book said, it's based on the belief that science can explain how, quote, each state or condition grew naturally out of the immediately preceding, and that meets a dead end at the beginning of time. So there's no, his axiom, even if it works everywhere except the Big Bang, it doesn't work there. And also in that chapter, I have quotes from several prominent scientists who didn't like the Big Bang. Sir Arthur Eddington, 1931, for example, said, "The notion of a beginning is repugnant to me." German chemist Walther Nernst, quoted by somebody, said the view that there might be an age of the universe was not science. He explained that the infinite duration of time was a basic element of all scientific thought, and to deny this would mean to betray the very foundations of science. And he was very angry about the Big Bang theory. So the question is, what happened? What caused the what happened before the Big Bang, if before means anything? And I'm reminded of Pastor Mark's comment last time about the God being outside of time. Well, that makes sense here. Maybe he's inside of time also, but if the universe had a beginning, if we believe in God, he created the laws of physics, then he is outside of time. So the video, if you noticed, says that there has to be some first cause, and the first cause isn't, people used to think that the matter was eternal, and matter and energy in the universe has always been basically like it is now, so you don't really need to explain how it got here. But that's no longer true. You do have to explain how it got here, or have to wonder how it got here, I guess. And the first cause, the cause for the universe, is by definition supernatural because it's forever beyond the reach of science. It couldn't have been natural phenomena, but there were no natural causes before nature came into existence. So the supernatural causes, were they intelligent or unintelligent? Well, there's no hope of ever explaining the first cause in terms of earlier causes. So the video says, why not believe in a first cause that can explain what was caused? In other words, why not, if you have to invent a first cause, you might as well invent one that explains how we got here, which would be an intelligent cause. Well, the video is a little more coherent than I have been here, but anyway, if you've noticed all the way through this course, the biggest objection to intelligent design is, where did God come from? You can't, science can't explain where God came from, therefore he can't exist. And that really is the kind of the driving force for most of the arguments against design. And I have another video here that I'm going to show a very short portion of by this Wolf-Eckhard Linisch, German scientist for 25 years of research scientist at the Max Planck Institute for Plant Breeding Research in Cologne. Let me bring that up here. It's a 42-minute interview. It's in German, but it's if you click on it's on YouTube with English subtitles. I'm just going to show my copy of it here with the German turned off and the Subtitles also turned off. Well, now it's turned off. And I just want to show one 3-minute segment of this where he talks about who designed the designer. And I would strongly suggest that you watch the whole interview with the English subtitles unless you speak German. Well, this is a Lutheran church, so half of you probably do. Let's see. Well, it doesn't. It's about here. Doesn't make much difference if I've got the subtitles turned off and the German turned off, but I'm going to read what he says here. The interviewer asked him who designed the designer, basically, and here's his reply. Says, actually, this is where he's, okay, yes, you're totally right. This is a standard objection which is used by leading Darwinists. In one of the recent bestsellers by Richard Dawkins, this was the main argument. We cannot accept this because then we would only have an explanation which in turn requires an even more complex explanation. I would like to answer as follows. Materialists have believed for more than 2,000 years that the universe is of infinite age and has no designer and no beginning. Only in the 20th century, and especially in the breakthrough of the 60s, it became clear that the universe had a beginning. Since Aristotle, since more than 2,000 years ago, it has been said that the universe is of infinite age and had no beginning. If this line of thinking was possible, then why is it now not possible to say that if a designer exists, maybe he also had no beginning? If it was possible to believe for 2,000 years that the universe had no beginning, why is it impossible to state a hypothesis that the designer had no beginning as well? This is, of course, what the Bible says. God is without beginning, from everlasting to everlasting, without beginning and without end. And exactly this point, from everlasting to everlasting, has been applied for 2,000 years to matter. Why can't we apply this eternity to God? And then a little later he adds, there are two different questions. If I have a Boeing or a jet aircraft, whatever, and I ask who has built this machine, then the answer is an engineer or a team of engineers. But some may ask, what is the origin of the engineers? Therefore, I don't believe this machine has been designed. We need to separate these two questions. Are there any clues from the structure of matter that suggest intelligent design? After that, we can ask another question. What is the origin of the designer? If it is possible to reason regarding intelligent design without asking the origin of the designer. This is certainly a possible and legitimate question, but it has not changed the reasoning. When there is a complex, specific, irreducible system, I can draw conclusions regarding a designer from that, but I can leave open the other question. So basically his first part of his reply is essentially what I've been saying, that there's no getting around a first cause, and whether the first cause is, we know it doesn't matter as we know it at least, but whether the first cause is intelligent or unintelligent, there's no way to explain it. So is it really any harder to believe that there was an intelligent first cause than an unintelligent first cause? Then the second part, though, is another different type of reply, and he basically says that we don't need to explain where the designer came from to recognize design, and that's very true. For example, we can when we have archaeological digs, we can discover things that we don't know who designed them, but we know they were designed. And one particularly interesting thing is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, where astronomers routinely try to decide if there's design present. They collect signals from distant sources and try to analyze them and say, does this look like it was designed or not, when they don't have any idea who designed it, if anybody. So, it's common for people to conclude that things are designed even if you don't know anything about the designer. Of course, we think we do know something about the designer, but not scientifically. We don't. We get that from another source. But the interesting thing is that these search for extraterrestrial intelligence astronomers scour the universe looking for the slightest evidence of intelligence, but ignore the evidence for design in living things where it is blindingly obvious. Richard Dawkins in the movie Expelled in, I think, 2008, possibility that, and he's a big design opponent. In fact, I quoted from him before. But he said, well, the one way that design could be present, it might have been extraterrestrials that designed life, but he said not God. And why would you allow the possibility that extraterrestrials could have designed life and not God? Well, he would probably say, well, we think we can explain where the extraterrestrials came from. That's Darwinism also, I guess. That's the only thing I can figure. Anyway, I want to show one more short clip from another video. This is actually Privileged Planet again. That kind of, it talks briefly about two of the three scientific discoveries that fuel the return of the God hypothesis in Steve Meyer's book. The other is the information in living systems, and the fine-tuning and the Big Bang. And I've got it set here where it should just show the appropriate parts. There we go. Should start at the right place.
The Kalam argument is deceptively simple in its formulation. It consists of basically three steps. Premise one is that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Something cannot come into being uncaused out of absolutely nothing. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise two is that the universe began to exist. And from those two premises, it follows logically, therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause of its existence. And the remarkable development that has occurred during the 20th century is that for the first time, we now have solid scientific evidence for the truth of that second premise, that the universe began to exist, so that this is no longer a matter of armchair cosmology pursued by philosophers. It's now a matter of simple scientific fact pursued by cosmologists.
If you reverse the motions, the outward motions of the galaxies, and go backward in time, they come closer and closer together. And you reach a point finally where they're nearly infinite in density and temperature. And farther than that you can't go. So there is a beginning. There is a point in time from which it all started. And that's a remarkable thing because it has a very strong theological flavor to it. And that intrigued me because I am an agnostic. And if there was a beginning, a moment of creation in the universe, then there was a creator. And a creator is not compatible with agnosticism. And I found that message so interesting that I felt a strong compulsion to share it with others. And so that's why I wrote that book. Just as I can't believe that there was a creator, I can't believe that this all happened by chance, which implies there was a creator. So you see, I'm in a completely hopeless bind, and I've stayed there. Again, I find it hard to believe that this is all a matter of atoms and molecules. And so I try to fit into my concept of the world the conclusion that there is a larger force of some kind, which we can call God, or you could call it whatever. But I can't accept that. I'm what's called a materialist in philosophy. I believe that doesn't mean I like Cadillacs and big cars. My students always used to think that. It means that I believe the world consists entirely of material substances. And when you specify those substances, the atoms and molecules, and the laws by which they interact, you've done it all. There isn't anything more to be said or inserted into your model of the universe. And that's what my science tells me, and I've been a scientist all my life. But I find it unsatisfactory. In fact, it makes me uneasy. I feel I'm missing something, but it will not. I will not find out what I'm missing within my lifetime.
The fine-tuning concerns two features of the observable universe. First, as you give the laws of nature mathematical expression, there appear in these equations certain constants, like the gravitational constant. And these constants are independent of the laws of nature. That is to say, the laws of nature, the equations, can be true, even though these constants take a wide range of values, so that the values that these constants have are independent of the laws of nature themselves. The laws of nature do not determine what the values of these constants are. Secondly, in addition to these constants, there are certain arbitrary quantities which seem to just be put in at the creation as initial conditions on which the laws of nature then operate. For example, the amount of entropy in the universe, or the balance of matter over antimatter in the early universe. And what scientists have discovered within the last 3 or 4 decades is that in order for intelligent life to exist, all of these cosmological quantities and constants have to fall in to an extraordinarily narrow, I cannot convey how almost infinitesimally narrow a range of values. Otherwise, the universe would be life prohibiting.
Okay, that's all I wanted to show from that. There were two people talking about the Big Bang, one who liked it and one who didn't. The Christian philosopher William Lane Craig does like it. We saw him earlier. And then he talked about also about the fine-tuning. I just thought that was a good concluding video because it talks about two of the things we've talked about. But now I want one more thing. I've got a review. So I'm basically finished with the course, except I've got a review, a little PowerPoint thing here to go through, quickly review of everything we've covered in these 5 weeks, and then we'll be done. Okay, so first we learned that the only way to avoid concluding that the laws and constants of physics and the initial conditions of our universe were fine-tuned by God to make life possible is to assume that there must be countless other universes with different conditions and invoke the anthropic principle, which is basically the conditions had to be just right because otherwise we wouldn't be here to wonder about them. And this is, this is basically point 2 in our video, and it's convinced a lot of people. The laws of physics are extremely well designed and finely tuned. And then there was another one that this is less documented, but to me it's equally interesting. The conditions on Earth and the laws of our universe are not only fine-tuned for our existence, but apparently also for scientific discovery and technological progress, and the anthropic principle cannot explain this fine-tuning. Well, that's not nearly as well documented as the general one, but as Behe says, it's hard to make a rigorous argument on this, but it seems obvious that there's a whole lot more to our universe than the anthropic principle would demand. And as I said in the video, basically it's just the only explanation for that is they're gifts from our designer to challenge and entertain us. And I would like to see more research done on that. There's only a few people: Guillermo Gonzalez, Michael Denton, and Collins. I'm sure there are others, but I would like to see more. I'm convinced that there's a lot there, but anyway. Okay, now if you believe that God designed the laws of nature to make life possible, why exclude a priori the possibility that he was still somehow involved after that in the creation of humans, especially when then you are forced to believe that the 4 unintelligent forces of physics alone could have reorganized the fundamental particles of physics on Earth into nuclear power plants, cars, airplanes, and smartphones. These forces are very cleverly designed and probably are clever enough to explain chemistry and stars and everything that has happened on other planets. But here are the 3 problems science must solve to explain how human civilization developed on Earth without further help from God. In other words, whether you believe God had anything to do with the design of the laws of physics or not. The point is that either way, if you believe that was the end of it, if God didn't have anything to do with that, or if that's all he did, then you basically have to believe that on Earth, these four fundamental forces of physics created computers and laptops. I'm not as mad at laptops today. So there's three problems that science needs to solve in order to explain how civilization developed. One is the origin of life, and I think everybody agrees that science cannot yet explain the origin of life. And I pointed out in my new article, newly published article, that the first life must have formed by chance chemical processes. There's no Darwinism, no natural selection before there were any self-replication. But even with all our advanced technology, we are still not close to creating human-engineered self-replicating machines. So I think we're a long ways from explaining how life began, if we are ever able to. Then the second step, from the evolution from the first life to complex animals, first life form to complex animals, Darwin's implausible explanation for evolution becomes even more implausible with each new biological and biochemical discovery. It is still popular today only because of Leconte's axiom and the fact that evolution doesn't look like the way we think God should have designed things, though it does look a lot like how humans design things. Major advances appear suddenly in the fossil record, and gradual development of new orders, classes, and phyla would require the development of new but not yet useful features. So Darwinism could not explain the development of these new features, even if they did appear gradually. I gave the example of that carnivorous bladderwort as a kind of obvious example of how you wouldn't make any sense to evolve that gradually. And third point, the origin of intelligent conscious humans, which we talked about today. Even if unintelligent forces could explain the appearance of complex animals, these forces cannot explain how it got inside one of these animals. So basically the three steps, we can't really explain any of them. Science can't explain. And the three steps from barren earth to what we see today in Albuquerque. And finally, the other point that we talked about today, the universe had a beginning, and since there were no natural causes before nature came into existence, science cannot ever hope to explain this beginning. And the class takeaway, well, I wish, one thing that I wish people understood more is that the reason most scientists still reject design is not because of the evidence, it's because they've ruled out God from the beginning. At least they've ruled out the possibility that God has done anything beyond design the laws of physics. Most of them, not by no means all. In fact, more and more are considering that possibility. But my main point is, if you haven't ruled out God for philosophical reasons, looking at the scientific evidence will make it very clear to you that God created the heavens and the earth in the beginning. Okay, I'm done. So I guess, oh, wow, finished just on time. So.